You're tuning into Her Hoops, and today we're talking about the elephant in the room that WNBA media has spent months trying not to see. Because for the first time in a long time, the silence just cracked. Sports media is finally admitting what fans, owners, and anyone paying attention have been saying out loud. There is a massive conflict of interest sitting right at the center of WNBA CBA negotiations, and it could push this league straight toward a lockout. Here's the problem. The same players helping run Unrivaled, the new offseason league positioning itself as an alternative power structure in women's basketball.
You guys know I have been very vocal about one particular thing involving the CBA negotiations, and that is the two players that are involved in the WNBA Players Association committee, and in fact, they're VPs on the Players Association committee, and I am talking about Brianna, Stewart, and Napheesa Collier. By the way, why'd you wait so long to get...
Are also vice presidents on the WNBA Players Association Executive Committee, the same committee that just voted to authorize a strike, the same committee steering negotiations that could cost the WNBA hundreds of millions of dollars, the same committee rejecting salary increases that are multiples higher than what most players currently make. Let that sink in. Brianna Stewart, Napheesa Collier, power players on both sides of the table, and for months, the media barely whispered, until now.
The very committee that voted to authorize a strike against WNBA and NBA owners over the CBA. The very committee that authorized the proposal that would lose the WNBA $700 million. The very committee that is turning down salary increases of about 9 times the amount of money you're making right now. These are the folks you've got in charge, and I've also been very vocal about the fact that where's the media? Where are you? Annie Costabile, Front Office Sports, all the morons over at ESPN.
Because when a Yahoo Sports podcast finally said the quiet part out loud, that yes, this is a conflict of interest, yes, it does matter, and yes, pretending otherwise is ridiculous. It exposed just how uncomfortable this situation really is. This isn't about questioning anyone's character. It's about human nature. If you own a business, if you profit from a league, if that league suddenly benefits from chaos, disruption, or a work stoppage elsewhere, you don't get to pretend that conflict magically disappears because you promise to compartmentalize.
Excuse me, if I'd have been driving, I might have ran off the road when I saw this. We've actually got a member of the media from Yahoo Sports that is acknowledging the two owners of Unrivaled that are on the committee are absolutely causing a conflict of interest. Not only is it a conflict of interest, it is extremely bad and poor optics. Because let's be real, if the WNBA was to go for a strike, what's keeping Unrivaled from going, you know what? Why don't we play 5-on-5?
And here's where it gets dangerous. Because if negotiations collapse, if a strike turns into a lockout, if owners decide they've had enough, Unrivaled doesn't just exist next to the WNBA anymore. It becomes leverage. It becomes a fallback. It becomes a threat, intentional or not. And that's why this story matters more than ever. So before we break down what the media finally admitted, what it means for players, and why owners may be closer to drawing a hard line than anyone realizes, hit like, subscribe to Her Hoops, and stay with me.
Yahoo Sports, let's check this out.
What do you make of the idea of the conflict of interest between Napheesa Collier and Brianna Stewart and the interest of Unrivaled may not necessarily aligning with the interest of the W?
Well, Fee and Stewie are not only WNBA players, they are on the executive committee. So as is Kelsey Plum, she's playing in Unrivaled. 3 of the 7 people on that board who can now vote for a strike are part of Unrivaled. That is not necessarily a bad.
Because this situation, it's way bigger than people want to admit. To understand why this conflict of interest is exploding right now, you have to rewind the tape. WNBA CBA negotiations were already tense. Owners and players were dug in. Revenue sharing, salaries, benefits, expansion, everything on the table, and everything expensive. The players authorized a strike vote as leverage, signaling they're willing to burn the house down if they don't get what they want. That alone is risky. But layered on top of that pressure is something the league has never dealt with before.
And that's the thing, is just to keep it in mind that these are two different things. If we want to go all the way back, like players have been playing overseas the entirety of the WNBA. That is also a conflict of interest because, as we know, the schedules overlap. You have to make decisions, all of these kinds of things. But to say that there's no conflict of interest is absolutely ridiculous, because there is.
Of course there is. You can say that you'll take your personal interest out of something, but
An outside league, founded by active WNBA stars, operating at the same time negotiations are happening. Enter Unrivaled. Marketed as a player-first revolution. Equity, control, ownership, a new model, a new future. Sounds great, until you realize who's running it. Brianna, Stewart, and Napheesa Collier aren't just participants, they're co-founders. They have financial skin in the game. Their success is directly tied to Unrivaled's growth, relevance, and long-term viability. At the same time, they sit on the WNBA Players Association Executive Committee as vice presidents, with the power to influence negotiations, messaging, and the nuclear option, a strike. That's where the optics turn ugly. Because when those same leaders push hardline positions, rejecting massive salary increases, authorizing labor action, escalating tension, it raises an unavoidable question. Who benefits if the WNBA stumbles? For months, mainstream WNBA coverage refused to even entertain that question. Articles read like press releases. Player narratives went unchallenged. Any criticism was dismissed as anti-player or anti-progress. But behind closed doors, owners were absolutely paying attention. They see an executive committee where nearly half the strike-authorizing board has ties to Unrivaled. They see overlap. They see leverage being created, intentionally or not. And they see a situation where a work stoppage could conveniently align with the rise of an alternative league. That's why when Yahoo Sports finally acknowledged the conflict, openly, clearly, without pretending it doesn't exist, it mattered. Because once the media admits it, owners stop feeling crazy. Fans stop being gaslit. And the league loses its ability to pretend this is business as usual. This isn't about overseas play. This isn't about off-season schedules. This is about power. And whether the people negotiating for the WNBA are also positioned to profit if negotiations fail. And once that door opens, there's no closing it again. Let's break this down cleanly. No emotion, no spin, just reality. First, who's on the board? The WNBA Players Association Executive Committee has 7 members with the authority to push negotiations forward, set tone, and vote on extreme measures like a strike. Out of those 7, 3 are directly tied to Unrivaled, either as founders, equity holders, or active participants. That's not a footnote. That's nearly half the decision makers. Second, what power they hold. This committee doesn't just advise. They authorize strike votes. They help frame negotiation demands. They influence how aggressively the union pushes back against ownership. When they reject proposals, that rejection carries weight, not just financially, but symbolically. Now add this layer. Unrivaled is a startup league. Startups live and die by attention, timing, and opportunity. The worst thing that could happen to Unrivaled is the WNBA becoming stronger, more stable, and more lucrative without it. The best thing? Disruption, chaos, uncertainty, a vacuum. No one has to sabotage anything for incentives to exist. That's the key point the media finally admitted. Conflict of interest doesn't require bad intentions. It exists the moment personal financial interests intersect with professional decision-making. Third, the financial reality. Reports indicate the current path of negotiations could cost the WNBA upward of hundreds of millions of dollars. Owners are being asked to dramatically increase salaries, in some cases by multiples, while still subsidizing league losses. Meanwhile, players are being told to hold the line, even when the numbers represent life-changing increases. That's a tough sell, especially when the leaders saying no have alternative income streams, ownership equity, and brand leverage outside the WNBA ecosystem. Fourth, the media shift. For months, criticism of this setup was treated like heresy. But when Yahoo Sports hosts openly said, "Of course there's a conflict, to deny it is ridiculous," the conversation changed. They acknowledged bias. They acknowledged human nature. They acknowledge that pretending otherwise insults the intelligence of everyone watching. And once that's said out loud, owners hear it, players hear it, fans hear it. And now every move this committee makes is being viewed through a different lens. Not what's best for the league, but who benefits if this all blows up. Here's where this stops being theoretical and starts getting dangerous. Because once owners recognize a conflict of interest, they don't argue about it on podcasts. They respond. And the most powerful response they have isn't a counteroffer, it's a lockout. Think about the contradiction staring everyone in the face. The Players Association authorizes a strike, a move designed to pressure ownership, while several of its leaders have financial stakes in a separate league that could benefit from WNBA downtime. Even if no one intends to leverage that, the appearance alone poisons trust. From an ownership perspective, that's a flashing red warning sign. Why negotiate in good faith if the people across the table may not be fully aligned with the league's survival? Why increase revenue sharing if the same leaders are helping build an alternative ecosystem? Why risk long-term losses when you can draw a line and say, enough? That's how lockouts happen. Not out of spite, but out of control. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. A lockout flips the power dynamic instantly. In a strike, players walk away by choice. In a lockout, owners shut the doors. No games, no checks, no leverage. Suddenly, the idea of turning down 9 times salary increases doesn't look brave, it looks reckless. And that's when fractures form inside the Players Association. Because not every player has equity, not every player has endorsements, not every player can afford to hold the line. Some players will start asking uncomfortable questions. Why are we sacrificing while others have backup plans? Why are the loudest voices also the safest financially? Why should we risk everything for leaders who don't carry the same risk? And that's when alignment breaks. A lockout forces choices. It forces players to decide whether loyalty outweighs opportunity, whether principles outweigh paychecks, whether crossing an invisible line is worth securing a future. Owners know this. They know unity is strongest when money is flowing and weakest when it's not. Which is why this conflict of interest isn't just a media debate. It's a strategic liability. It invites escalation. It invites hardball. And it invites ownership to stop negotiating emotionally and start negotiating structurally. The moment trust disappears, cooperation dies with it. And right now, trust is hanging by a thread. Now let's zoom in, not on headlines, not on podcasts, but on how this actually lands at the player level. Because while leadership talks about leverage and long-term vision, most players live in the short-term reality of contracts, roster spots, and career windows that close fast. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Not all players are equally positioned to absorb risk. For stars with endorsement deals, equity stakes, and alternative leagues waiting in the wings, a prolonged work stoppage is painful, but survivable. For mid-rotation players, rookies, and veterans hanging on to their final contracts, it's existential. That's why conflicts of interest matter most when pressure hits. When leaders reject major salary increases, the assumption is that everyone is aligned. But alignment only works when incentives match. And right now, incentives are fractured. Some players are negotiating from a place of security. Others are negotiating from fear. And that gap changes behavior. Take the idea of holding the line. It sounds strong in theory. It sounds unified. But when checks stop coming, unity gets tested fast. Players start doing the math. Rent, training costs, health insurance, career timelines. Suddenly, principle competes with survival. This is where locker rooms split, quietly at first. Whispers become questions. Questions become doubt. Doubt becomes resentment. And that resentment doesn't target ownership first. It targets leadership. Why were we pushed this far? Who decided this risk was acceptable? Who benefits if this drags on? That's the personal side of this debate. the part spreadsheets don't capture. And here's another layer: optics inside negotiations. Owners aren't just evaluating numbers, they're evaluating credibility. When they see negotiators with parallel business interests, every demand feels strategic rather than cooperative. Even reasonable asks start sounding like leverage plays. That makes compromise harder. And once compromise disappears, outcomes get extreme. This isn't about accusing anyone of bad faith. It's about acknowledging that structure shapes behavior. When leadership roles overlap with ownership roles elsewhere, trust erodes, even if intentions are pure. That's why this moment is so fragile, because the deeper this goes, the less this is about a CBA, and the more it becomes about whether the WNBA can maintain internal cohesion when incentives no longer line up. Now let's step back and look at the bigger picture. This isn't just a drama about a few players and a strike vote. This is a defining moment for the WNBA as a league, a brand, and a culture. First, the league itself is on the line. Negotiations, strikes, and potential lockouts don't just affect this season, they set precedent. If owners lock out the league or push back hard, it signals that no amount of idealism, activism, or negotiation savvy can overcome structural leverage. That shapes the bargaining power of future player generations and can change the entire economics of the league for decades. Second, the media and public perception are critical. For too long, coverage of this conflict of interest was muted. Articles read like press releases, avoiding hard questions, shying away from uncomfortable truths. But now, mainstream voices are acknowledging the elephant in the room. That transparency forces fans to reckon with the complexity of the situation. Loyalty, ambition, and business interests are clashing in ways many didn't expect. Third, and perhaps most importantly, it highlights a cultural tension within the WNBA. The league has cultivated a narrative of unity, activism, and player empowerment. But what happens when real-world incentives collide with ideology? When financial interests diverge from collective ideals? Fans may start to question whether the WNBA is still a league operating on principle, or if it's increasingly driven by parallel ventures, side projects, and personal gain. The broader impact also reaches into the off-season ecosystem. Unrivaled isn't just a side hustle, it's a potential disruptor. If it grows alongside a WNBA work stoppage, it can siphon attention, talent, and investment away from the main league. That could change recruitment, endorsements, and media deals, essentially rewriting the landscape of women's basketball outside the court. Finally, this situation serves as a cautionary tale for leadership. Conflicts of interest, even when unintentional, are not invisible. Fans notice, media notices, owners notice. And once trust erodes, rebuilding it becomes exponentially harder. This isn't a story about villainy or sabotage. It's a story about structure, incentives, and the pressures of professional sports at the highest level. The WNBA is at a crossroads, and the choices made today by leadership, players, and media will echo for years. Here's the bottom line. The WNBA is staring down a storm it has never seen before. Negotiations, strikes, lockouts, and conflicts of interest are no longer theoretical. They're real, immediate, and unavoidable. And right at the heart of it are the people entrusted to lead the Players Association, who also have financial stakes in a competing league. That dual role, whether intentional or not, is shaking the very foundation of trust that the league relies on. Fans are watching. Owners are calculating. Media is finally speaking up. And players? They're caught between principle and practicality, between collective strength and individual survival. Make no mistake, this is about power, leverage, and strategy. The optics of leadership running parallel leagues, approving strike votes, and holding back salary increases aren't just a talking point for podcasts. They're a structural vulnerability. A misstep here could cost the WNBA millions, fan loyalty, and potentially even talent, as alternative leagues like Unrivaled offer new options for players willing to take their careers in a different direction. And let's not sugarcoat it. If the WNBA hits a lockout, the dynamics change overnight. The strike vote becomes irrelevant. The question of loyalty versus opportunity comes front and center. Players will have to decide whether to cross an invisible line or stand firm and risk the fallout. Stars like Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, and others are already weighing these realities. They see the conflicts, they understand the stakes, and they're calculating their next moves carefully. The media has a role too. Silence is no longer an option. When voices like Yahoo Sports finally call out the conflict, it forces accountability, it forces transparency, and it forces everyone involved, players, owners, and executives alike, to navigate this minefield with a little more honesty and a lot more strategy. Here's the takeaway for fans and followers of women's basketball. This isn't just about salary numbers or schedules. This is about the very architecture of the league, how power is distributed, and whether leadership can truly put the league's interests above personal gain. This moment will define the next era of the WNBA, and the decisions made in the coming months will ripple far beyond the court. So here's what you need to do. Stay informed, stay engaged, and don't let the narrative get sanitized. Watch closely who is making decisions, who benefits, and who is putting the league first. Because this is the drama that will shape the WNBA for years to come. If you want the inside scoop, the unfiltered takes, and the no-holds-barred analysis on women's basketball, hit like, subscribe to Her Hoops, and turn on notifications. We're just getting started, and trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. The WNBA is at a crossroads, and the stakes have never been higher.